The monitors beeped in a private wing of St. Adeline's Hospital where no ordinary patient was ever allowed to stay, and behind a door guarded by two men in dark suits lay a baby boy who was disappearing right in front of everyone's eyes. His name was Nico Salvano, heir to a family whose name alone could empty a restaurant in the time it took to whisper it, and yet all the power his father commanded could not stop his son from losing weight, day after day, for reasons no specialist could explain. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the quiet courage of ordinary people who do the right thing even when it terrifies them, smash that like button right now, drop a comment below, share this with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Shadow Boss Tales so you never miss a story like this one. And before we go further, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? I want to know who's sitting with me for this one. Don Massimo Salvano was a man built out of silence and consequence. He ran the docks on the east side of the city, and beneath the surface of shipping manifests and warehouse contracts, he ran considerably more than that. Men who crossed him did not get warnings. They got funerals, quiet ones, arranged with the same efficiency he brought to everything else in his life. But none of that mattered anymore. Not since the morning 3 months ago when his wife had died bringing Nico into the world, and the only softness left in Massimo's chest had transferred itself entirely onto the small, fragile body of his son. For the first 6 weeks, Nico had been a normal, healthy baby, if a baby guarded by armed men in an apartment with bulletproof windows could ever be called normal. He fed well. He gained weight on schedule. He gripped his father's finger with a strength that made even Massimo's hardest lieutenants smile despite themselves. Then, without warning, the numbers on the pediatric scale began to slide backward. A few ounces at first, easy to dismiss. Then a full pound in a week. Then another. The family physician, a nervous man named Dr. Aldous Ferrante who had been paid enormously well for years precisely so he would never ask uncomfortable questions, ran every test his equipment allowed. Formula intolerance. Reflux. Metabolic panels. Nothing showed abnormal, and yet the baby kept shrinking, his cheeks losing their roundness, his cries growing thinner instead of louder. Massimo brought in specialists from 3 different cities. He had men fly in from overseas, doctors who had treated royalty, and each one left with the same helpless shrug and the same fee collected quietly at the door. He could make problems vanish with a phone call. He could not make this one disappear, and the powerlessness ate at him in a way that violence never had. He stopped attending to business entirely. His captains whispered among themselves that the boss was unraveling, and for the first time in his life as head of the family, Massimo did not care what anyone whispered. It was in this climate of fear and secrecy that nurse Elena Marchetti was assigned to the private wing. She was 28, recently transferred from a public hospital across town, chosen specifically because she had no family in the city, no ties that could be leveraged, and a spotless record that made her safe in the eyes of men who trusted almost no one. She was told, in blunt terms by one of Massimo's men, that she was to feed the baby, monitor his vitals, and speak to absolutely no one about anything she witnessed inside that room. She agreed, because the pay was extraordinary and because, underneath the fear that came with working for a man like Massimo Salvano, she had a stubborn, old-fashioned belief that every child deserved someone fighting for them. From her very first shift, something about the situation nagged at Elena in a way she could not immediately name. The specialist's charts were thorough, almost aggressively so, full of ruled-out possibilities and dead ends. But charts, she had learned over years of night shifts and difficult patients, only tell you what people thought to look for. They rarely tell you what nobody thought to ask. She began watching Nico not as a set of numbers on a feeding chart, but as a small, frightened creature trying to communicate the only way he could. She noticed, on her second night, that Nico fed eagerly in the first few minutes of every bottle, then grew agitated, arching his back, turning his face away with something that looked less like fullness and more like distress. The previous nurses and doctors had recorded this as fussiness, common enough in infants, easily dismissed. Elena did not dismiss it. She began timing his feeds to the minute. She logged not just how many ounces he took, but how he behaved in the seconds before he refused the rest. She noted the exact temperature of the room, whether the lights were dim or bright, whether Massimo was present or absent, because she had begun to suspect, quietly and without daring to say it aloud yet, that something environmental, something nobody official had thought to question, was at the root of it. On her fifth night, working alone while the household slept and the guards outside the door dozed at their posts, Elena did something no other nurse or doctor had bothered to do. She sat on the floor beside Nico's crib for nearly 2 hours, not checking vitals, not administering anything, simply watching him breathe, watching the small distress signals that flickered across his face when certain sounds echoed through the vents, when certain smells drifted in from the kitchen 2 floors below. She began to realize that his agitation spiked at almost exactly the same time every evening, coinciding with when the household staff prepared dinner for Massimo's men, or rich, garlic-heavy sauce whose aroma traveled easily through the building's old ventilation system. It was a fragile thread of a theory, the kind that could easily be laughed out of a hospital board meeting, but Elena had learned long ago that some of the most important clues in medicine hide in details too small and too strange for busy specialists to bother chasing. She requested, carefully and respectfully, a meeting with Dr. Ferrante, knowing full well that questioning a man paid handsomely to have all the answers could cost her the job, or worse. Ferrante was dismissive at first, reminding her sharply that he had run every test modern medicine offered. But Elena, calm and steady in the way only someone who has nothing left to lose by telling the truth can be, laid out her nightly logs, hour by hour, feed by feed, symptom by symptom, and asked him a single question that stopped him cold. Had anyone ever tested Nico specifically for a rare protein allergy triggered not by his formula, but by trace compounds passed through breathed-in aerosolized cooking oils in enclosed spaces, a condition so uncommon it rarely appeared outside specialized pediatric allergy literature? Ferrante, humbled and unsettled, agreed to run the test the very next morning, more to disprove Elena than to confirm her. When the results came back 2 days later, they confirmed exactly what she suspected. Nico was suffering from a severe, rare hypersensitivity, one that made his small body treat certain airborne compounds as an invasion to be violently rejected, suppressing his appetite and causing his tiny system to reject nutrients even when he appeared to be feeding normally. It was not the formula. It was not his mother's genetics, whispered about fearfully among the staff. It was the very air of the home meant to protect him, made toxic by nothing more sinister than a nightly pot of simmering garlic and oil traveling upward through old pipes into a nursery no one had ever thought to seal off. When Massimo was told, standing in the doorway of his son's room with his broad shoulders trembling in a way none of his men had ever witnessed, he did not yell, did not demand anyone's head for the oversight. He simply walked to where Elena stood, this exhausted young nurse who had risked her position and quite possibly her safety by pushing a theory no one wanted to hear, and he asked her, in a voice stripped of all its usual authority, how she had known when men with medical degrees from the finest universities in the world had failed for 3 months to see it. Elena told him the truth. She had not known, not for certain, not the way the machines and charts pretended to know things. She had simply refused to stop watching, refused to accept that a baby's suffering could be reduced to numbers on a scale, and had trusted that somewhere in the pattern of his small, desperate cries there was information worth chasing down, even if it meant challenging men far more credentialed and far more powerful than herself. Within a week, the ventilation into the nursery was completely resealed, an independent air filtration system installed at extraordinary cost, and the kitchen staff relocated their cooking to a separate building entirely. Nico's weight stabilized within days, and by the end of the following month, he had not only regained everything he had lost, but surpassed it, his cheeks filling out again, his cries growing strong and demanding in the way that had once made his father laugh with relief in the early weeks of his life. Massimo Salvano, a man history and reputation both painted as untouchable and unmoved, wept openly the first night he watched his son finish an entire bottle without distress, without arching away in pain, simply drinking and drifting into a peaceful, ordinary sleep. He offered Elena more money than she had earned in her entire nursing career combined, offered her protection, position, anything within his considerable reach. She asked only for one thing in return, that he used some fraction of his influence to fund a small pediatric research initiative at the public hospital where she had trained, so that other families without private wings and imported specialists might have access to someone willing to look as closely as she had. He agreed without hesitation, and within a year, that modest initiative had grown into a fully staffed diagnostic unit named Quietly, without fanfare, after a mother none of the doctors there had ever met, a small plaque near the entrance reading simply, "For every child someone almost stopped looking for." If this story moved something in you tonight, if it reminded you that sometimes the people who save us are not the ones with the most credentials but the ones with the most patience and heart, please take just a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs a reminder that second chances are real. I want to leave you with one special request before we close this chapter together. Tell me in the comments what part of Elena's story touched you most, because I read every single one, and your words remind me why these stories matter. Nico Salvano grew up never knowing how close he had come to slipping away in that guarded room, never knowing the name of the nurse who had refused to look away when everyone else had already given up. But somewhere in the quiet architecture of that household, in the sealed vents and the funded hospital wing and the father who softened forever after that year, her stubborn kindness lived on, proof that even in the coldest, most guarded corners of the world, someone paying close enough attention can still change everything. Thank you for watching Shadow Boss Tales tonight. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told and remembered, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.